So we've had the 2000s for over 20 years. We're now in 2022. Wouldn't you say that the 2000s have been the age of nostalgia? The age of nostalgia. And you can see it, remakes, reboots, this clamming on to or clinging to the before, because things today are not sufficient. Would that be accurate? Or they don't give the same vibrations as the things from before, maybe. I mean, there are some really cool stuff in the 2000s. Make no mistake, there's a lot of good stuff. But the age of nostalgia, this wanting to go backwards, go back to a time when, or back in the day when. Like when you look at a lot of the movie reaction channels, you'll see in the comments here on YouTube, they don't make movies like this anymore. You'll even see comments about CGI being too much. Oh, yeah, they used practical effects. Oh, I wish movies did that today. So, of course, when you have a lot of comments like that you'll see on movie reaction channels or even movie clips here on YouTube, you think, wow, people really do miss that stuff. Or if they didn't grow up with that stuff, they wish that they did. You'll even see that in the comments, where it'll be someone that wasn't even born during that time. Maybe they were born in the 2000s and they happen to watch an old movie from before 2000 with practical effects, and it excites them. And they're like, man, how come they don't do this anymore? What happened? What's going on? And so you think, was there some sort of a miss? Did something get lost in translation before the 2000s in terms of innovation, in terms of organic ideas, creating, being inspired by something rather than trying to redo it all over again? Because there is a difference. You're inspired by that and you take the vibrations of that thing, put it in your idea, but you're putting your own thing onto it. So you're not redoing that. You're inspired by that. See, there's a difference. Because, of course, artists have always been inspired by others. Now, of course, I'm speaking with just art. There's many other things. We're in the tech age. So I was in an Uber and the driver asked me, so what name would you give the 2000s? Here we are, 2022. I'd say, yeah, it's the age of nostalgia and mediocrity. I would add that in there too. Mediocrity. It's cool to be mediocre. Yeah. Being the best, on the level of some of your favorites from before, you don't necessarily have to be that. You can be half or less than half and still be considered cool. And once upon a time, that wasn't the case. You had to be the best at whatever it is that you did. Mediocrity? No. You had to push for the top. There were some people that slipped through the cracks that were mediocre, but it was rare. Now it's cool all across the board. If you're mediocre, it's cool. The 2000s. That's what that is. And we've had some good stuff. I'm not going to knock the 2000s. My favorite of the 2000s, which I may have expressed before in an episode of T.O.T, is YouTube. You can find all kinds of things that you want, anything you want, pretty much. I love it. You can choose what you want to watch. I love that. I love the idea of being able to communicate with people at the push of a button. I love that. Having access to people that you probably wouldn't have access to in 1992, for example. You would have to go through a bunch of middlemen or women in order to get to that person in a high status or high position. So now you have a direct connect to those individuals via social media, which has its hit and misses, but I do appreciate that. I appreciate the access to lots of information quickly. For those of you that did not grow up before Google, you really don't understand how much of a challenge it was to get information, Again, thinking about the access to information. Now, what's interesting about that is we live in a time right now where you have access to information just by clicking some buttons, and there it is. You have access, tons of access. You would think that critical thinking skills would be elevated because of the access to all sorts of information. There's so much information that you can get in seconds, yet how much of that information do you actually seek out? You know what I mean? Or do you just get it from one source? Wikipedia would be an example. Most people go to Wikipedia, but what they don't realize is that site is not all that accurate and can be edited. So why would you get everything from Wikipedia? You know, the key is to go to Wikipedia and other sources that are available to you at the push of a button, right? You would have about 25 different sources. 25 years ago, it would be a struggle to get those things. So you would think that critical thinking, common sense, social skills, you would think that all of that would improve with the amount of information that we have so readily available. But it's actually taken a dive down, so much to the point to where people don't know the difference between humor and sarcasm. People don't have the patience to read body language. They don't have the patience for that, for the most part. Those of you that do, good job. But for the most part, it's missing. The social element has taken a dip with this instant gratification thing that we have, right? Reading body language, knowing the tone of voice, having an appreciation for that. Once that happens, people recognize, oh, yeah, talking to people does feel good. Oh, yeah, I know the difference. I can read body language. I understand what this person's intentions are based on their body language. It is a human gift. It is your gift to be able to read a person, to be able to read the room. That is your gift. But because you've been relying on this so much, you don't use it much. So with the 2000s, I can see the appreciation for this tech age and what it grants us. And it's only going to increase. I mean, there's stuff on the table that we probably even haven't thought of that's being worked on right now and will be in the market very soon. I did an episode about the sex bots. But it's interesting when you think about the difference between post Google and pre Google. And then 2020 really reset things, didn't it? Because it forced you to be at home. And what were you doing? You were online. So validation would be the thing that I don't necessarily like within the 2000s. The increase of validation. Let me make sure I create a distinction here, because it's not that validation wasn't sought after before the 2000s. It was. But then in comes social media, and it just added an extra boost to it, especially after 2010. You could even argue that much of the validation seeking, the really the increase in that, or the acceleration of that, probably fired off after 2010. So look at that timeline, 2010 to 2022. Look at that. You're talking about validation through Instagram, social media. You're talking about the validation through these social justice groups, because in the end, when you cut away the layers, that's about validation too. You look at the hashtag movements, you look at cancel culture. Those are things that I don't like about the 2000s, more so the 2010s, because that's when that accelerated. Everything after 2013 accelerated via Twitter. A keyboard gangster, a person that you don't even know exists, typing something, sending it out, it goes viral, and then you have a company that changes their policy based on that, and they don't even know who the person is or where it came from. That's the part I don't like. So as opposed to doing a market research group where you have about, I don't know, 200 people in a room and you ask them questions about your product, you do it online. But then when you're online, you're dealing with bots and keyboard gangsters. You know, that whole misinformation thing or fake news and all of this stuff. And, you know, it's created sort of this wild, wild west of the digital footprint. So I don't necessarily, I'm not enjoying that, because I'm seeing what it's doing, because it's taking away the patience with the process. It's taking away the ability to read the room, the ability to process information, the ability to think before you respond, to process what's being said, to really break it all down. There's some things that need immediate reaction, the same way you text, right? And there's some things where you got to sit back and take a pause, process what you just heard, and then speak. See, that's gone, because people are so used to how this functions. And so it has been embedded into their fabric. I don't know, man. It's interesting to look at because before all of this, people processed a little bit more. Of course, there were issues and I mean, you have a group of people out there that think that everything before Google was toxic. There's people out here who believe this. I grew up before Google, and I can tell you, it wasn't all toxic. There were some really good moments in terms of social, human interaction, stuff that was organic. So much to the point to where I'm standing at a bus stop in 1995 on my way to the nightclub. A limo pulls up to the light. The window comes down, and it's a bunch of ladies in the limo, and they say, "Hey, where you going?" I say, "I'm going to the Palace in Hollywood," back when it was called the Palace. And they say, "Oh, we're going there too. You want to ride?" And I'm like, right? Now, I could have been psycho or whatever, but no, I get in and we go and we have a good time at the club. Organic, random. Now, of course, today, what are the chances of that happening today? Especially with our social climate, the way that it is post hashtag era, 2017 to now, right? It has changed the landscape in terms of being able to sort of use your intuition, that thing that tells you that it's okay, that thing, that signal that goes off when you deal with people that lets you know exactly how to navigate with people. That a lot of that is lost because of this, because you spend so much time with your head down. But again, the beauty of it is that you access so much information. But man, people don't really do that. That's the thing. That's the crazy thing about it. When it was harder to get information, people used more critical thinking. Now that it's easy, people don't. They got lazier, even though it's at the push of a button. Who would have thought? The age of mediocrity, or the age of nostalgia and mediocrity, so much to the point to where customer service today is not what customer service was 25 years ago. Okay. Law enforcement has had an impact. The political landscape has had an impact. Business has had an impact. Family dynamics, relationship dynamics has had an impact. There's been a loss. And really, when you think about it, it's between 2012 and now, because that's when it accelerated. Okay. Because before 2012, you still had the residue of this. Even though the phones existed, the social media was in play. It was all being planted between 2000 and 2010. Takes off after. So there it is. Look how much change has happened in the way you think and how you move. Some of you grew up with this, so this is all you know. So, but for those of us that grew up before it, look at how much we have been impacted by it. We've been affected by it. I have been affected by it, to the point to where I actually go to text rather than talk in some cases. Even though I prefer this, I'll go to the texting, But it's interesting to think about because it's become of the fabric of our minds and has controlled our minds so much to where we don't know anything else and we can't put the technology down. We can't turn it off. We can't put it aside. It controls us, doesn't it? To the point to where you don't know what to do when you don't have it. Once upon a time, that wasn't the case. You knew. You go back to just 2002, people were at the concert, enjoying the concert without having to worry about filming it. Yeah. You would watch the artist on stage. You didn't have to put something up to film it so that you could share it with 1 million people on your social media platform just for validation to show that you were at the concert. You didn't need that. You were there at the concert. You enjoyed the artist. You felt it. You've got an audience around you. You're loving it. Now you're watching it through this. You're watching it through that. It's a live show, but you're at the live show watching it through a device because you're filming it to show proof to other people. For what? Validation. Validation has become the ultimate drug of the 2000s. Now, I don't blame these devices. I don't blame it. Because, of course, technology is always going to advance. We've seen it over throughout the history of human beings. It's the abuse of it. That's the issue. There's no balance. I mentioned this before. How can we restore the balance of human interaction and creativity? How can we restore the balance of innovation, the balance of being able to deal with adverse situations, a la George McFly in Back to the Future? He was bullied, he overcame it. That's why people love Back to the Future. Overcoming adversity, the Rocky story. You know what I mean? People relate to those old movies for that very reason. That's why we're trying to redo a lot of that stuff. We're trying to redo that stuff because it's the stuff that really, you really feel something from that stuff. A lot of that is lost in the 2000s or has been lost. You know, we're getting it in little small doses here and there, but it's not dominant. So what will happen going forward as we head further into these 2020s or these 2000s? You know, we have a decade in play here. How do we restore the balance? Will you enjoy things the way that we enjoyed them before Google? Is it even possible to do that with everything being advanced technologically? I don't know. We'll see what happens.